Commander Jake Morrison had been staring at the same coffee stain on his console for 3 hours when the universe decided to remind him why he'd joined the deep space monitoring cores in the first place. The emergency beacon didn't just cut through the routine static, it tore through it like a scream in a library, causing every technician on level 7 to freeze mid-conversation. Jake's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the metal floor. In 47 years of galactic silence, nothing had ever transmitted directly to Earth. Nothing had dared. Lieutenant Brooks, Jake barked, his voice cutting through the sudden chaos of beeping consoles and panicked whispers. Tell me you're getting a clean translation on that signal. Amy Brooks looked like she'd seen a ghost, which, given the circumstances, might not have been far from the truth. Her normally steady hands shook as she worked the translation matrix, sweat beading on her forehead despite the station's perpetual chill. Sir, this is impossible, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The transmission is coded with pre-quarantine diplomatic protocols. Whoever sent this knows exactly who we are and what we're capable of. Jake felt his stomach drop into his boots. The pre-quarantine protocols had been classified at levels that made Black Ops look like children's games. Only 3 species in the known galaxy had ever possessed that information, and 2 of them were extinct. Read me the message, Lieutenant, word for word. Amy's voice cracked as she began. Origin confirmed as Outer Rim. Sector 47. Species identification, Altarian Republic. Message begins. To the Terran Federation, greetings from a dying civilization. We know what you did to the Veltar Empire. We remember the Proxima incident. We understand why the galaxy fears you. Sir, there's more. The monitoring station had gone dead silent. Every technician, every analyst, every coffee-fetching intern was staring at Amy like she held the fate of the universe in her trembling hands. Which, Jake realized with growing horror, she probably did. Continue, he ordered, though part of him wanted to cut the transmission and pretend none of this had ever happened. The Devourers have come to our space. They have consumed the Kepler colonies, the Vega stations, and the entire Zeta Reticulus system. 60 billion souls turned to raw matter in less than a standard week. The Galactic Council's fleets have fallen like wheat before the harvest. We have 18 hours before they reach our core worlds. Jake's blood turned to ice water. The Dev weren't just some pirate fleet or rogue AI. They were the galaxy's worst nightmare made manifest. Mechanical locusts, the size of cities. Programmed with one simple directive: consume everything, everywhere. Until the universe was nothing but empty space and their ever-growing swarm. Sir, Amy continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, they're offering complete capitulation, full technological exchange, territorial concessions, even cultural integration protocols. They're literally offering to become a human client state in exchange for intervention. Jake stared at the tactical display, showing the Devourer advance, remembering his grandfather's stories about the bad old days, before the quarantine, before humanity had been caged like a dangerous animal that had bitten too many neighbors. But here's the thing about dangerous animals: sometimes the neighborhood needs them. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Jake called to his communications. Officer, what's the current status of the Terran fleet? Rodriguez consulted his displays, his face growing pale. Sir, according to our last intelligence reports, we have approximately 300 active warships in various states of readiness. Most are equipped with the special weapons systems. Special weapons systems. That was the polite term for technology that had made the Galactic Council collectively wet themselves and vote for humanity's immediate exile. Jake had seen the classified footage from the Veltar incident, an entire star system reduced to cosmic dust in less than 6 hours. The Veltar had possessed the largest military force in the known galaxy. They'd also made the mistake of threatening human colonies. Sir, there's a final part to the message, Amy said. her voice now steady with the kind of calm that comes from accepting the inevitable. "We know you withdrew from galactic affairs to protect us from yourselves. We're asking you to become monsters again. Please, save us." The words hung in the recycled air like a death sentence, or maybe a reprieve, depending on your perspective. Jake looked around the monitoring station at the faces of men and women who had spent their entire careers listening to the galaxy's chatter while remaining forever on the outside. Most of them had never seen a real battle, never witnessed what humanity was capable of when the gloves came off. They were about to get a front row seat to the greatest horror show in galactic history. "Rodriguez, open a secure channel to Earth Defense Command. Priority Alpha clearance." "Sir, that's going to wake up a lot of very important people who have been sleeping peacefully for 5 decades. Jake smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Good. Tell Admiral Carter that the galaxy needs its apex predators again. Tell her the hunt is on." As Rodriguez began transmitting the message that would end humanity's self-imposed exile, Jake found himself thinking about his daughter, safe in her college dormitory on Mars, studying art history instead of military tactics. She'd grown up in a universe where humans were the boogeyman, the species so dangerous that even their allies had voted to lock them away. She was about to learn why. "Sir," Amy said, her voice cutting through his dark thoughts, "we're receiving additional transmissions. Multiple species are now requesting immediate human intervention. The Cathini Collective, the Zephyr Commonwealth, even the Andromedans are breaking their silence." "How long since the last Andromedan transmission?" 73 years, sir. "Not since they voted for the quarantine." Jake nodded grimly. The Andromedans were proud, ancient, and absolutely terrified of humans. If they were asking for help, the situation wasn't just bad, it was apocalyptic. But here's what the galaxy had forgotten during 50 years of peaceful isolation. Humans didn't just fight wars. They perfected them. They turned warfare into an art form, then into a science, then into something that transcended both. The Devourers were about to learn what happened when you threatened something humans cared about. And despite everything, quarantine, the fear, the decades of forced isolation, humanity still cared about the galaxy's innocence. "Lieutenant Brooks, send a response to all requesting species." Single word, acknowledged. As alarms began wailing across Earth's hidden military installations, Jake Morrison sat back in his chair and waited for the universe to remember why evolution had made humans its most efficient killers. The 47-year exile was ending, and the galaxy's long nightmare was about to begin. Admiral Lisa Carter hadn't slept in 36 hours, but exhaustion was a luxury she couldn't afford when watching civilizations die in real time. The war room beneath Colorado Springs hummed with deadly purpose, its holographic displays, painting a picture of galactic genocide that would have broken lesser minds. Each blinking red dot represented a world consumed, a culture erased, billions of lives reduced to raw materials for an insatiable mechanical hunger. The Devourer swarm moved across the galaxy like a cancer, leaving nothing but empty space in its wake. Carter watched entire solar systems simply vanish from the tactical display, their light snuffed out as if they'd never existed at all. The mathematical precision of it was almost beautiful if you ignored the fact that each calculation represented the death of everything humanity had once sworn to protect. "Ma'am, incoming priority transmission from the Outer Rim," Colonel Mike Davis announced, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the command center. The man looked like he'd aged a decade in the past week, which wasn't surprising considering he'd spent most of it watching the galaxy burn. Carter didn't look away from the displays. "Let me guess, another species begging for mercy from the monsters they locked away." "The Altarian Republic, ma'am. They're offering complete capitulation, full territorial concessions, technological exchange, even cultural integration protocols. They're literally offering to become human property in exchange for intervention." Now that got Carter's attention. The Altarians weren't just any species. Were the galaxy's philosophers, the ones who'd spent thousands of years perfecting the art of diplomatic neutrality. They'd also been among the loudest voices, calling for humanity's quarantine after the Veltar incident. "How much time do they have?" she asked, though the tactical display already told her everything she needed to know. 18 hours before the swarm reaches their core worlds. Maybe less if the Devourers maintain their current consumption rate. Carter closed her eyes and saw Ambassador Rythok's face from 47 years ago, those large, expressive eyes filled with absolute terror, as he cast his vote to exile humanity from civilized space. She'd been a young captain then, standing in the gallery, as the galaxy's representatives decided that humans were too dangerous to coexist with. Funny how perspectives changed when you needed those same monsters to save your children. "Colonel, what's our current fleet status?" Carter asked, opening her eyes to find Davis, consulting his classified displays with the grim efficiency of a man preparing for Armageddon. "Full deployment capability, ma'am. The Prometheus, Vengeance, and Retribution battle groups are at 100% readiness. All vessels equipped with Mark VII Lazarus-class weapons systems." The room went dead silent. Even the background hum of the quantum processors seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves understood the weight of those words. Lazarus-class weapons weren't just military hardware, they were applied physics taken to its logical, terrifying conclusion. The last time humanity had deployed Lazarus-class systems, the Veltar Empire had controlled 17 star systems and possessed the most advanced military technology in the known galaxy. 6 hours later, their entire civilization was nothing but cooling plasma clouds and traumatic memories. "Ma'am," Davis continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "once we cross that quarantine line, there's no going back. The galaxy spent 50 years trying to forget what we're capable of when we're truly motivated. They're about to get a very unpleasant reminder." Carter stared at the tactical display showing the Devourer advance, each pulsing red indicator representing the death of worlds she'd once visited as a young explorer. Before the quarantine, before humanity had been forced to choose between isolation and being feared as galactic tyrants. But here's the thing about fear. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between civilization and the abyss. "Tell me about the Altarian children, Colonel," Carter said suddenly, catching Davis off guard. "Ma'am, the Altarian Republic? How many children live in their core systems?" Davis consulted his intelligence files, confusion clear on his weathered face. Approximately 40 billion juveniles across their 3 primary worlds. "Ma'am, why?" Carter smiled, and it was the kind of expression that had once made enemy admirals consider early retirement. "Because 40 billion children didn't vote to quarantine us. They were probably learning to read, while their parents were deciding we were too dangerous to trust." She turned to face the assembled staff officers, men and women who'd spent their entire careers preparing for a war that might never come. Their faces showed the same mixture of anticipation and dread that Carter felt in her bones. The knowledge that they were about to unleash something the galaxy had hoped never to see again. "Gentlemen, ladies, prepare for full fleet deployment. Authorization code, Lazarus 77 Alpha. All vessels to combat readiness within 4 hours." The command center erupted into controlled chaos as officers rushed to execute orders that hadn't been given in half a century. Communication arrays that had been dormant since the quarantine suddenly blazed to life, reaching out to military installations hidden across the solar system. "Ma'am," Davis said quietly, "the political implications of this action are irrelevant." Carter cut him off. "Politics are for peacetime, Colonel. What we're about to engage in is the exact opposite of peace." She walked to the master tactical display, watching as status indicators across Earth's secret military network shifted from amber to green. Deep beneath the Australian outback, the Prometheus was powering up its Lazarus drives. In the asteroid belt, The Vengeance battle group was loading ordnance that violated 17 different galactic conventions near Jupiter's moons. The Retribution was running final checks on weapon systems that existed solely to end civilizations. Send a message to the Altarian Republic, Carter commanded, her voice carrying the authority of a species that had once conquered half the galaxy before choosing to conquer themselves instead. Tell them the wolves are coming. Evacuate all civilian populations to designated safe zones. Prepare for total war protocols. Ma'am, should we inform the Galactic Council of our intentions? Carter's laugh was sharp enough to cut steel. Colonel, the Galactic Council spent 50 years congratulating themselves on successfully caging humanity. They're about to learn why we agreed to be caged in the first place. As alarms began wailing across Earth's most classified installations, Carter found herself thinking about her son Michael, now a grown man with children of his own. He'd grown up hearing stories about the bad old days, when humans were the galaxy's apex predators, and every other species lived in constant fear of earning their attention. Those weren't just stories anymore, ma'am. All battle groups report ready for deployment. Estimated transit time to Altarian space, 72 hours at maximum burn. Make it 48, Carter ordered. And Colonel, send a personal message to every ship captain in the fleet. Tell them we're not going out there to win a war. Wars are what civilized species fight. We're going out there to remind the universe what happens when you threaten something humans care about. As the first human warships began their burn toward the outer rim, Carter remained in the war room, watching displays that showed civilizations dying by the hour. The Devourers had made a critical error in their calculations. They'd assumed they were facing defenseless prey. They were about to meet the galaxy's most efficient predators, emerging from 50 years of forced hibernation with an appetite for controlled violence that would make gods weep. The hunt was on, and this time, humanity wasn't planning on showing mercy to anything that stood between them and their prey. Fleet Admiral Kethler had commanded warships for over 3 centuries, but nothing in his extensive military career had prepared him for the systematic annihilation of everything he'd sworn to protect. His flagship, the Eternal Dawn, shuddered as another Devourer harvest beam swept past, close enough to strip paint from the hull but somehow missing the ship entirely. Lucky. No, Kethler realized, with growing horror. The machines were toying with him, saving his vessel for last, so he could watch his entire civilization disappear. The tactical display told a story of perfect, methodical genocide. Red icons, representing Devourer ships, moved through his defensive formations, like sharks through a school of fish. Each contact the size of a small moon, and armed with technology that turned matter itself into a weapon. They didn't just destroy his ships, they consumed them, breaking down centuries of Altarian engineering into raw materials for their ever-expanding swarm. Sir, we've lost the entire Northern Fleet, his aide, Commander Yulthera, reported through barely controlled sobs. Her voice cracked on every word. The professional composure of a lifetime military officer, finally breaking under the weight of witnessing extinction in real time. The crystal harmony and Star's Edge are gone. Consumed. Admiral Felthic's final transmission was just screaming. Kethler forced himself to watch through the main viewport as a Devourer harvest ship engaged its feeding protocols on the Star's Edge. The proud heavy cruiser, a vessel that had served the Altarian Republic for 200 years, simply came apart at the molecular level, its hull dissolving into streams of raw atoms that flowed into the mechanical monstrosities, storage bays. Somewhere in that stream of matter were the remains of 8,000 crew members, including his former student, Captain Medeni, who'd just become a grandmother last month. The Devourers weren't just killing them, they were erasing them from existence, turning living beings into fuel with the same casual efficiency most species use to process breakfast. Any response from Earth? Kethler asked, though asking humans for help felt like swallowing broken glass. His people had been among the loudest voices calling for humanity's quarantine after the Veltar incident. They'd voted to cage the monsters, and now those same monsters represented their only hope for survival. Commander Yulthara consulted her long-range sensors, her face cycling through several shades of disbelief. Sir, sensors are detecting multiple contacts approaching from the Sol system at impossible velocity. Mass readings are— This can't be right. What are you reading, Commander? Individual vessel displacement averaging 15 million tons, sir. Drive signatures unlike anything in our databases, and their acceleration curves are violating several laws of physics. Kethler's twin hearts stopped beating for a full second. 15 million tons per vessel meant these weren't scouts, or even standard battleships. These were something else entirely— weapons platforms, designed by a species that had spent 50 years in isolation, perfecting the art of controlled annihilation. How many ships? He whispered, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Approximately 300 vessels in tight formation, sir. Estimated time to engagement zone, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, Kethler would either witness the salvation of his species, or watch the galaxy's most efficient killers demonstrate why every civilized world had voted to lock them away from polite society. Visual confirmation in 10 seconds, the sensor operator announced, his voice tight with the kind of anticipation that comes from knowing you're about to witness something that will haunt your dreams forever. When the main display resolved, showing the approaching human fleet in all its terrible glory, pure liquid terror flooded Kethler's nervous system. The human ships weren't large by conventional standards, maybe 300 vessels, compared to the thousands his own forces had fielded, but each one radiated menace like a physical force. These weren't exploration vessels or even traditional warships. These were predators made manifest, designed by evolution's most successful apex species. After 50 years of forced contemplation on the nature of controlled violence, the lead vessel, a sleek nightmare of black metal and barely contained energy, looked like it had been forged in the heart of a dying star, specifically to end civilizations. Its weapons arrays alone were larger than most species' capital ships, and the energy readings coming from its drive systems suggested it could probably crack a planet's crust, if properly motivated. Sir Yulthara whispered, her voice carrying the kind of awe usually reserved for religious experiences or natural disasters. That's not just a warship. That's applied physics taken to its logical, terrifying conclusion. Kethler stared at the human fleet and remembered the classified footage from the Veltar incident that had convinced his people to vote for the quarantine. The Veltar Empire had possessed the most advanced military technology in the known galaxy, controlled 17 star systems, and maintained a standing fleet of over 10,000 vessels. 6 hours after first contact with human forces, their entire civilization was nothing but cooling plasma clouds and traumatic memories scattered across space. Sir, incoming transmission from the lead human vessel, the communications officer reported, his voice shaking so badly he could barely form words. Admiral Lisa Carter, requesting immediate tactical authorization and full rules of engagement. Protocols. Kethler straightened in his command chair, drawing on 3 centuries of military discipline to find his voice. His people had made this choice 47 years ago, when they voted to exile humanity from civilized space. They'd decided that humans were too dangerous to coexist with, too violent to trust with the galaxy's future. Now that same capacity for violence represented their only hope of having a future at all. Grant them everything, he commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge with the authority of a species facing extinction. Full tactical command, unlimited rules of engagement, complete operational authority. Tell Admiral Carter that the Altarian Republic formally surrenders all military command to human forces, Sir Yulthara said quietly. Once we give them operational control, there's no taking it back. They'll have carte blanche to do whatever they think is necessary. Kethler looked out at the Devourer swarm, machines that had already consumed 60 worlds and showed no signs of slowing down. Then he looked at the human fleet. Weapons platforms designed by a species that had once conquered half the galaxy before choosing to conquer themselves instead. Commander, my people voted to cage these predators out of fear. Now that same terror might be our salvation. Send the authorization, and pray to whatever gods are listening, that when the humans are finished here, there's still a galaxy left to save. As the transmission went out, Kethler found himself wondering if they'd just called for rescue, or simply chosen the manner of their own extinction. The humans were coming, and the universe was about to remember why every other species had agreed it was safer to keep them locked away. The question was, would anyone survive to regret that decision? Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, her hands clasped behind her back, as she studied the tactical display with the patient focus of a master chess player contemplating her opponent's final moves. The Devourer swarms spread across her screens like a mechanical cancer, their harvest ships moving in perfect geometric formations that spoke of machine intelligence optimized for one purpose, consuming everything in their path with maximum efficiency. 50 years of forced isolation had given humanity time to think, to plan, to perfect the art of controlled violence in ways that would have made their ancestors weep with pride and terror. The Devourers had evolved to prey on civilized species beings who fought with honor, followed rules of engagement, and believed that warfare should have some connection to morality. They were about to learn why evolution had made humans the galaxy's most efficient killers. Ma'am, Devourer formations are maintaining standard harvest protocols, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wells, her voice tight with the kind of anticipation that comes from watching predators circle their prey. They're treating us like any other defensive fleet. Standard approach vectors, predictable consumption patterns. Carter smiled, and it was the kind of expression that had once made enemy admirals consider career changes. They're thinking like machines, Lieutenant Commander, following programming designed to harvest defenseless civilizations. They've never encountered something that specializes in controlled extinction. The bridge crew exchanged glances that mixed excitement with barely controlled terror. These men and women had trained their entire careers for a war that might never come, studying classified footage of the Veltar incident and wondering if they'd ever get the chance to demonstrate what humanity had learned during 50 years of self-imposed exile. All ships, this is Admiral Carter, she announced, her voice carrying across the fleet's communication networks with the authority of a species that had once conquered half the galaxy, before choosing to conquer themselves. Instead, execute Protocol Ragnarok, authorization code, Lazarus 77 Alpha. Across the human fleet, something extraordinary happened. Defensive systems that had been running at full power suddenly went dark, their energy redirected to weapons, arrays and engine cores. Shield generators shut down, point defense systems powered off, and damage control systems switched to standby mode to any outside observer. It looked like the human fleet was committing suicide. The galaxy had spent decades analyzing what they considered humanity's greatest weakness, their apparent disregard for self-preservation in combat situations. Military academies across civilized space taught courses on human combat psychosis, the seemingly irrational tendency for human forces to sacrifice defensive capabilities for offensive power when faced with overwhelming odds. The galaxy was about to learn they'd been catastrophically wrong. It wasn't a weakness. It was evolution in action. Ma'am, the Devourers are altering course to intercept, reported Wells, her voice carrying a note of savage satisfaction. They're targeting our command ship. All harvest vessels converging on our position. Perfect, Carter replied, her tone carrying the predatory satisfaction of a wolf watching sheep walk into her trap. They want to cut the head off the snake. Let them come. All vessels, prepare to initiate Cascade Protocol, on my mark. The Devourer fleet moved with mechanical precision, Their harvest ships, each one the size of a small moon, closing in on the human formation with the confidence of predators that had never encountered meaningful resistance. Their collective intelligence calculated victory probabilities, analyzed human weapon signatures, and prepared consumption protocols for processing 300 human vessels into raw materials. They had no idea they were about to witness something that violated everything they understood about the nature of warfare. "Ma'am, lead devourer vessels are within optimal range," Wells announced. "They're powering up harvest arrays." Carter's smile widened. "All vessels, execute cascade protocol now." What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries, assuming any survived to study it. The human ships didn't engage the devourers in conventional battle. Instead, they did something that no sane species would ever attempt. They synchronized their faster-than-light drives and used them as weapons. 300 human vessels, each equipped with Lazarus-class FTL systems, created a controlled dimensional fracture directly in the devourer's path. They literally tore reality apart, opening a rift in space-time that existed for exactly 3.7 seconds before the laws of physics reasserted themselves. It was enough. 2/3 of the Devourer fleet machines that had consumed 60 worlds and showed no signs of slowing down found themselves scattered across 23 different star systems. Their collective consciousness severed, their perfect coordination shattered like glass hitting concrete. "Phase 2, Carter announced, her voice carrying the grim joy of a predator finally unleashed after decades of restraint. "All vessels, show them what apex predators do to invasive species." The remaining human ships accelerated beyond anything their designers had considered safe, their crews enduring gravitational forces that would have liquefied most organic species. They struck the confused devourer remnants like hammers forged from controlled fury, their weapons systems unleashing energies that had been banned by 17 different galactic conventions. Lazarus-class weapons didn't just destroy targets, they unmade them, breaking down matter at the subatomic level and converting it into pure energy. The surviving devourer vessels, still reeling from the dimensional fracture, found themselves facing weapons that treated the fundamental forces of the universe as suggestions rather than laws. "Ma'am, devourer vessel designated Alpha 7 is attempting to retreat," Wells reported, her voice mixing professional calm with barely contained bloodlust. "Negative," Carter replied without hesitation. "No survivors. Nothing escapes to report our capabilities to whatever created them." The human fleet moved through the scattered devourer remnants like wolves through a flock of sheep, their weapon systems operating with the methodical efficiency of a species that had spent 50 years perfecting the art of controlled annihilation. Each engagement lasted seconds, just long enough for human weapons to reduce mechanical monstrosities the size of cities into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Within 12 minutes, the greatest threat in galactic history was nothing more than debris fields and the dying electromagnetic screams of machines learning what it meant to fear. "Ma'am," Colonel Davis reported from the Fleet Coordination Center, his voice carrying a note of awe that spoke to witnessing something that transcended normal military operations. "We're receiving transmissions from the Altarian fleet. They're requesting permission to express their gratitude." Carter stared out at the wreckage of the devourer swarm, thinking about 50 years of exile, about her son Michael asking why humans couldn't visit the stars, about the fear in alien eyes whenever humanity was mentioned in galactic councils. "Tell them we're going home, Colonel," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of a species that had just reminded the universe why they'd been caged in the first place. "And send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them we only come out to hunt." As the human fleet began its journey back to quarantined space, leaving behind nothing but expanding debris fields and traumatized witnesses, Carter allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The galaxy had spent 50 years trying to forget what humans were capable of when properly motivated. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Ambassador Daniel Wright had faced down enemy fleets, negotiated peace treaties under fire, and once stared down a Kethany war chief in single combat. But nothing in his 30-year diplomatic career had prepared him for walking into a room where 51 different species were simultaneously terrified of him and desperately needed his help. The Galactic Council chamber on Nexus Prime had been rebuilt twice since the original, structured once after the Andromedon War and again after the Veltar incident. The current incarnation was designed to project peace and cooperation, all flowing curves and soft lighting that supposedly promoted harmony among diverse species. Today, it felt more like a courtroom where the defendant happened to be the galaxy's most efficient apex predator. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Altair Prime, and the recordings were still making their way through diplomatic channels across civilized space. Footage of human ships tearing reality apart like tissue paper, weapons that treated the laws of physics as polite suggestions, and tactics that bordered on controlled insanity. The Devourers swarm mechanical locusts that had consumed 60 worlds reduced to expanding debris. Fields in 12 minutes of combat. Daniel could taste the fear in the recycled air as he walked to the speaker's podium. 51 species, representing trillions of beings across the galaxy, and every single one of them was calculating whether humanity represented salvation or simply a different flavor of extinction. Honorable delegates, Daniel began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a species that had just reminded the universe why they'd been caged in the first place. 6 months ago, you called upon humanity to save the Altarian Republic from annihilation. We answered that call. Today, I'm here to discuss the future of human galactic relations. High Counselor Veltek of the Cathani Collective shifted in his bioluminescent chair, his color-changing skin cycling through shades that indicated deep unease, mixed with grudging respect. The Cathani were warriors by nature, a species that valued martial prowess above almost everything else. They'd been among the most vocal supporters of humanity's quarantine, not out of moral objection but out of professional recognition that humans were simply too good at warfare to compete with. Ambassador Wright, Velthak said, his translator rendering his bioelectric communication into standard galactic. The Council acknowledges humanity's intervention in the Devourer crisis. Your species saved billions of lives. We are prepared to discuss modifications to the existing quarantine protocols. Daniel smiled, and the expression caused several delegates to instinctively lean away from their viewing screens. Human facial expressions still unnerved most species. Too many teeth. Too much predatory calculation behind the eyes. Counselor Velthak, with respect, we're not here to modify the quarantine. We're here to replace it entirely. The Terran Federation proposes a new arrangement, conditional reintegration into galactic affairs. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, translation matrices struggling to keep up with the sudden outpouring of concern, curiosity, and barely controlled panic. Delegate Morden, of the Trade Consortium, a species that had grown wealthy by avoiding conflict whenever possible, raised one of his 4 arms for attention. Ambassador, what exactly do you mean by conditional reintegration? Daniel had been waiting for this question. He'd spent months crafting the perfect response, one that would make humanity's position crystal clear without triggering another round of galactic panic. Simple, he replied, his tone carrying the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards in a high-stakes poker game. Complete sovereignty over human space and populations. No interference in our internal affairs. No attempts to regulate our military capabilities. No oversight of our technological development. In exchange, when existential threats emerge, and only then, you call us. The silence that followed was so complete that Daniel could hear the soft hum of the chamber's life support systems. 51 species worth of delegates tried to process what they'd just heard. Humanity was offering to become the galaxy's guard dog, but only on their own terms. And if we refuse this arrangement? Asked Delegate Yul Morgan of the Centauri Federation. though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Daniel's smile widened, showing just enough teeth to remind everyone present why evolution had made humans apex predators. Then you face the next devourer-class threat, alone. We've grown quite fond of isolation over the past 50 years. It gives us time to perfect our hobbies. The delegates didn't need clarification about what humanity's hobbies involved. The Battle of Altair Prime had provided a comprehensive demonstration of how humans spent their free time, developing weapons that violated multiple laws of physics and tactics that made military academies across the galaxy rewrite their textbooks. On Applied Violence. Counselor Velthak leaned forward, his skin cycling through colors that indicated deep thought, mixed with grudging admiration. Ambassador, your proposal essentially makes humanity the galaxy's insurance policy, a weapon to be deployed only in case of existential emergency. Exactly, Daniel replied. Think of us as the galaxy's immune system. Most of the time, we stay dormant, minding our own business, in our corner of space. But when something truly dangerous appears, something that threatens the fundamental survival of galactic civilization, then you wake us up. The chamber filled with the alien equivalent of nervous murmuring as delegates conferred with their advisors and home governments. Daniel waited patiently, knowing that the mathematics of the situation spoke for themselves. The Devourer crisis had demonstrated that conventional galactic military forces were woefully inadequate against certain classes of threats. Humanity represented the nuclear option, devastating to deploy, but sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and extinction. The motion is approved, Velthak announced after 20 minutes of frantic deliberation. By unanimous consent, the Terran Federation is granted complete autonomy over designated human space in exchange for military intervention during galaxy-threatening crises. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, their conversations mixing relief with lingering unease, young Counselor Lenara of the Altarian Republic approached Daniel's position. Her scales shimmered with gratitude, patterns of biological display that her species used to express deep emotional states. Ambassador. Right, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone whose entire civilization owed its existence to human intervention. My people have been wondering about something since the battle. After the quarantine, after how we treated your species, after 50 years of isolation. Why did you save us? Why risk everything to protect beings who had voted to lock you away? Daniel paused at the chamber's threshold, looking back at the assembled representatives, beings who had once voted to imprison humanity out of terror, who would probably make the same choice again if they thought they could get away with it. The fear was still there in their eyes, mixed now with gratitude and grudging respect, but fear nonetheless. Counselor Linata, he said simply, his voice carrying the quiet strength of a species that had chosen to become monsters so others could remain innocent. That's what humans do. We protect what's worth protecting, even when it fears us. Especially then, as Daniel walked away from the chamber, leaving behind delegates still processing the implications of their new arrangement. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The galaxy had just formally acknowledged what humanity had always known. Sometimes the universe needed its monsters, and humans were very good at being exactly the kind of monsters the universe required. In the vast darkness of space, new threats were already stirring, drawn by whispers of the Devourer's destruction, and curious about the species that had achieved such comprehensive victory. But for the first time in half a century, the galaxy could sleep peacefully, knowing that somewhere beyond the quarantine line, humanity maintained its patient vigil, waiting for the next call that would wake them from their chosen exile. The wolves were sleeping, but they were always listening, ready to remind the universe that some things were worth protecting, no matter the cost. The end.